Hey guys, it's Chris from Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. This episode is part 4 of the steampunk guitar build. And what I'm going to be doing in this episode is I'm going to be gluing the fretboard onto the neck. And yeah, it's going to take a whole episode to explain this. It's not a very complicated process. However, as I mentioned in the last episode, and I'll put a link up here so you can go back and check that out if you want to get caught up. I mentioned that I have to address this approach a little bit differently. And it's, for the most part, it's going to seem exactly the same as other fretboard to neck glue ups that I've done. The difference is I'm going to be painting this neck. However, the fretboard is going to stay natural. And as a result, I want to make sure that I account for the thickness of my primer, my color coats, and my final top coats, because I want those to be flush with the edge of the fretboard. I don't want any line that you might be able to feel as you're playing the guitar. Because if you've ever encountered that, anytime you come across a seam like that where the finish meets wood, it's a little bit disconcerting. And so I don't want to have that be an issue. So what I did to address that was, after I had finished carving the neck, I took a block of wood with sandpaper and I sanded just the edge of the neck. And I was able to reduce its width ever so slightly, so that the fretboard is actually about, I'd say, a 32nd to a 16th of an inch wider than the neck itself. So the fretboard is actually slightly overhanging the neck. Now when I go to paint this, what I'll do is I'll mask off the fretboard, and then I'll just spray my primer, my color coats, and then my clear. And I would say that by the end of my, I'll probably put down around 8 coats of clear. By the time I get done with that clear, it should be perhaps slightly proud of the fretboard. And what that means is the finish will actually extend out slightly from the fretboard. So then what I would do is go back, and as I level sand and finish sand the neck, I would just bring that down until it's flush with the fretboard. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and glue this up. So I'll bring you in closer and you can watch how I do this. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use it's a fixture or a jig. I made this myself a while back. In fact, I did another video on this particular jig. I'll put a link up here, somewhere over here. And what it basically is designed to do is to support the neck as I glue on the fretboard. And I use this, it's a channeled clamping caul that sits down on the top of the neck. And the purpose of the channel is it's designed to apply the majority of clamping force along the edge of the fretboard. That way there won't be any gaps that can appear, and that can always be kind of frustrating. Of course, the key to this is to make sure that this surface and this back surface have all been planed and sanded absolutely flat and smooth. Any gaps in any of these is going to show up, especially at the edge. Now this fixture is something I created myself, and before any of you message me and ask if I can make one for you, I can't. And the reason is this particular specific jig and fixture was made specifically for this neck. So it'll work for my necks, but it probably won't for your necks. However, if you build guitars with a CNC machine and you have 3D models of your neck, you can kind of reverse engineer those necks to build a simple clamping support like this. So anyway, that's how I will be supporting the neck. And the reason why I do this is because, as I mentioned in the last episode, a lot of guys, when they build a neck, they'll take a neck blank, and just a rectangular neck blank, and then they'll take a fretboard blank, which of course is a rectangle as well. They'll glue the two together, and then they proceed with the carving and shaping and slotting and drilling and all that work. And I don't work that way. When I make my necks, I make the fretboard all the way to completion. I make the neck all the way to completion. And then I bring the two together. Now, the advantage of gluing up a blank, your blanks first, is that you have, everything's flat. You don't have to worry about contoured surfaces or radius surfaces. So it's easy to glue it up. But with the way I do it, I have to be aware of the potential for things to move around. And that's why I made this jig or this fixture. It prevents the guitar neck from moving around as I clamp it. So everything stays pretty stationary. And that makes it easy to glue the fretboard to the neck even after I've done the neck carving and the fretboard radius carving. So, but the first thing I'll do is I'll install the truss rod. And it's important to note that the top surface of the truss rod must be absolutely flush or just a skosh below the gluing surface. If it isn't, if it's sticking up above it when you go to glue down your fretboard, as you clamp it down and pull down the sides to the gluing surface and get everything clamped tightly, you actually will change the radius. And it can also impede the performance of the truss rod. So you just want to make sure it's flush or slightly below the gluing surface. And the glue that I'm going to use is just, this is Titebond 2. The original Titebond 1 and Titebond 3, they all work really well. In fact, I've used Gorilla Glue before. And I know some of you will think, oh my God, Gorilla Glue, that's nuts. Why would you use Gorilla Glue? Well, some of the woods that we use for our fretboards can be really oily, and it can be a challenge to glue them up. You'll think you have it glued down, but then the minute you adjust your truss rod, boing, your fretboard pops off. So I've actually used Cocobolo, which is a very oily wood, on maple using Gorilla Glue, and it worked great. So now once I've got that truss rod in there, I don't want any glue to get in there, although it's not a critical issue because this truss rod is wrapped in a plastic wrap. But I will go ahead and pull off some masking tape, and I will center that right over the truss rod, and that'll just keep the glue out as I'm applying it. First thing we have to do is remove that tape because we don't want that in there. Now, as you know, wood glue is really slippery. So when you put the fretboard on, there's always a chance as you go to clamp it that it might slide. So what I do is I use table salt. This is an old woodworker's trick. You just put a little bit of salt, take just a tiny pinch, and all it takes is a few grains in a couple of spots. And what that'll do, because remember, salt is a mineral. It's basically a rock. When you salt your food, you're putting rocks on it. But what this will do is it will act like it'll act like it has teeth. And it will grab onto the fretboard and hold it in place. And at first, we're just going to clamp the fretboard for a few minutes to get the glue to set up. So I'll just give it a light amount of pressure, make sure that I have it on there correctly, that I have the right overhang on both sides. Then I'll come down to the other end and I will do the same thing. Just a light amount of pressure. There we go. And then one in the middle. Once the glue is tacked up, I'll remove the clamps and then I'll place the clamping caul on top of the fretboard, and then I'll fill it with as many clamps as I can get on there. And I will tighten them out until I see an even amount of glue squeeze out on both sides of the fretboard. And that's how I glue the fretboard to the neck. So what I'll do is I'll just let this sit for probably 24 hours overnight. And then I'll pull the clamps, I'll scrape off that glue squeeze out, and then I can begin final sanding of the neck. And then from there, we'll start to jump in on the CNC work for the body. So until the next episode, I hope you have a great weekend, a great week ahead, and well, we'll see you soon.